The series we're now in, as our second week, is called Rebuilders. Rebuilders, for obvious reasons. And you may be aware that as the exile of the Israelites came to an end, Ezra first, and then Nehemiah went back, each with a different but related task to restore the city of Jerusalem in God's name. And they stand in a long line of people that the Lord God has used to rebuild not just physical structures, but also the people of Israel themselves. Think about Moses being sent back into Egypt as the leader of a broken, downtrodden slave people, to call them out as a nation. Think about, even before that, 400 years before that, think about Joseph, God's man, just the right place, just the right time to do his work. And we may be thinking, what does it have to do with us? That was them, we're us. But I do think we can learn from this book what it is that marks these people out, what it is that God is, as it were, looking for in people he can use to as rebuilders, as restorers, as reformers, as those who seek to enlarge his kingdom. And one of the most important things I think that unites these people that I've mentioned is zeal. Zeal. It's not a word we use a huge amount today, and if we do use, it's generally in the negative of somebody who perhaps believes something too strongly, who is a zealot. I think there are worse things than being called a zealot, but there you are. Bishop Ryle describes zeal as this. He says, "Zeal in religion is a burning desire to please God, to do his will, and to advance his glory in the world in every possible way." This desire is so strong when it really reigns in a man that it impels him to make any sacrifice, to go through any trouble, to deny himself to any amount, to suffer, to work, to labour, to toil, to spend himself and be spent, and even to die, if only he can please God and honour Christ. I hope we'll see as we go through these passages that is certainly true of Nehemiah. And even at the beginning of this sermon, perhaps we should be asking ourselves, are we zealous like that for the Lord? What would it take for us, if not, to be zealous like Nehemiah? What would it be like if we only lived to please God and honour Christ? So hopefully we can learn some instructive lessons from Nehemiah's example. Now, for those who weren't here last week, Steve took us through chapter 1. Chapter 1 we could label the power of position, in that, as I said, here was Nehemiah, exactly the right man, in the right place, at the right time to do God's work. And by way of recap, in the first 3 verses, as we read earlier, we saw a bad report. We saw that the Jerusalem so magnificently described by the pen of the psalmist in Psalm 48 was now what? Trouble, disgrace, broken, burned. There was no beauty about Jerusalem, nothing to inspire awe and wonder and praise to God from any who saw it. Nothing to turn enemy kings away in terror, like we read about in Psalm 48. Trouble, disgrace, broken, burned, no beauty. And there were no boundaries The walls were in rubble, the gates were burned. The distinctions between who were God's people and who were not God's people has been disrupted. And then in verse 4 we saw, after the bad report, we saw a broken heart. It's moving, isn't it, when you see Nehemiah's reaction. When I heard these things, I sat down and wept. For some days I mourned and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven. He is weeping. He is broken for God's people and God's place and God's honour. He is broken, as we saw in his prayer, over the sins, the absolutely unnecessary, willful sins of God's people that had led to this reality. We saw, as well as that, in verses 5 to 11, we saw a bold prayer, which Steve helpfully outlined for us, is in four distinct sections. Nehemiah addresses his prayer to the great and gracious God. He confesses his own sins and those of the nation. He recalls the promises of God and then appeals to God, who has a unique relationship with his people. This is not just any city. This is not just any downtrodden, miserable people. These are God's people in God's place, and he appeals to God's covenant love, his covenant promises, and his work of redemption. These are the ones you took out of Egypt. Will you not now deliver them from this disgrace? A bad report, a broken heart, a bold prayer. And then in verse 11 we see a brilliant position. Here he is, a brilliant but precarious position, as we heard last week. He has full access to two kings. He has the ear of the king of Persia, and he has the ear of the king of heaven. He is in a brilliant position to do the Lord's work. So that's just a summary of chapter 1, which builds then through into chapter 2. We're going to do 1 to 10 this week, and Lord willing, 11 to 20 next week. And this section I've entitled The Power of Prayer. The Power of Prayer. And you might be wondering why, when the prayer was in chapter 1. Well, we see the fruits, don't we? The outcomes of that prayer in chapter 2. Chronologically, it's 4 months on. 4 months during which Nehemiah has been weeping, mourning, fasting and praying. We see that in chapter 1 verse 4, but he has also been planning, as we'll see going through the narrative. And chapter 2 opens with an everyday encounter between master and servant. This is something that would have been going on day after day as long as Nehemiah had been serving the king as cupbearer or butler. But we see in this everyday encounter a much bigger story. We see God's story, God's purpose and his power for his people. And particularly we see evidence of the power of prayer. Steve pointed out to us last week that the whole of Nehemiah's prayer in chapter 1 really only included one supplication, one petition right at the end. Give your servant success today by granting him favour in the presence of this man. We see what this prayer leads to. It put me in mind of something the Lord Jesus said to his disciples in Matthew 17 verse 20. He said to them, truly I tell you, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you. And today, in our passage today, we see a mountain moved we see the heart of King Artaxerxes moved to grant Nehemiah's requests. So, 5 things to draw your attention to, and then some words of application. Number 1, a sad face. A sad face, verses 1 to 3. In the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when wine was brought for him, I took the wine and gave it to the king. I had not been sad in his presence before, so the king asked me, "Why does your face look so sad when you are not ill?" "This can be nothing but sadness of heart." I was very much afraid, but I said to the king, "May the king live forever. Why should my face not look sad when the city where my ancestors are buried lies in ruins and its gates have been destroyed by fire?" Here we have a regular activity. As I said, something that Nehemiah had been doing for days, weeks, months, years, as Artaxerxes' cupbearer, taking the cup, testing the contents, not dying, and handing the cup over to the king for his enjoyment. It was a regular activity, but he had an irregular appearance. He looked sad. And we don't know whether Nehemiah had planned to look sad, or whether actually in this moment the thoughts of the ruin and the destruction of Jerusalem had made him look sad, and he could not keep that hidden. His broken heart for his people and for his city was such that he couldn't keep that sadness from his face, and that the king remarkably says, not off with his head, "No one looks sad in my presence," but he says, "Why does your face look so sad when you're not ill? This can be nothing but sadness of heart." He's not only a great king, he's also a great psychologist. He understands what's happening here. And Nehemiah's response to this is very striking. He says, "I was very much afraid." I was very much afraid. Here's a man who had prayed in faith, still very much afraid. And I find that tremendously reassuring, that as we often see in the pages of scriptures, the heroes of faith, that faith coexisted with fear. Faith is not the absence of fear. Faith is the fear but, as we shall see. He says here, "I was very much afraid," beginning of verse 3, "but I said to the king." His faith is fear but, not fear so. Maybe you remember the parable that Jesus told of some servants and some talents. The unworthy servant who buried his master's money said this when his master returned. He said, "I knew you were a hard man, harvesting where you have not sown and gathering where you have not scattered seed. So I was afraid and went out and hid your gold in the ground. See, here is what belongs to you." Fear and leads you away from the thing that faith would have you to do. Not so with Nehemiah. He is fear but I said to the king. And what he said, you'll note, was respectful. It was not brash and harsh or disrespectful in any way. May the king live forever. And all he does is makes an honest observation. "Why should my face not look sad when the city where my ancestors are buried lies in ruins and its gates have been destroyed by fire?" It's a statement of fact. For Artaxerxes, with his vast Persian kingdom, this was just a small, obscure outpost hundreds of miles away. But to Nehemiah, that was the place where his ancestors were buried, and had seen great destruction and great ruin. So he just makes an observation. And I find this really instructive for those of you, perhaps like me, acknowledged in home group in the week, when opportunities come to witness to friends, to family, to work colleagues, to people we meet, when we see an opportunity and fear perhaps takes us and fear stops us. All we need to give, as well as to be respectful, is just an honest testimony, just an honest account of what the Lord has done for us. I'm comforted and helped by what Peter wrote in one of his epistles along these lines. He said in 1 Peter 3:15, he said, "Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect." That was Nehemiah, wasn't it? He had an opportunity to speak to the king, someone he had right reason to be fearful of. We have the opportunity to speak to people, even if we're afraid. Can we be prepared just to give an honest observation of the reason we have hope, why we have hope through Jesus Christ the Lord? So first up then, a sad face. Secondly, in verse 4 we see a swift prayer. Sad face and then a swift prayer. The king said to me, "What is it that you want? What is it you want?" Then I prayed to the God of heaven. Now, I don't know what you imagine in that moment. Does he get down on his knees and repeat the prayer he'd prayed before? Does he raise holy hands to heaven? Or is it just actually no change on his facial expression, his thoughts directed up to heaven? I wonder what he said. What did he ask? Was it just help? Or now, Lord? Or something like that. It is an arrow prayer, as it's come to be known. And as we go through the book of Nehemiah, you will see that from time to time things arise, and there's that arrow prayer, in that moment. Perhaps what helps him to overcome his fears of the king of Persia is he directs his thoughts and his prayers to the king of heaven, who holds the king of Persia in his hands. And I take from this reassurance that there is power in short prayers. There is power in long prayers. God is ready to answer. He's more ready to answer, I think, than we are to ask. And I love what's said of God by God the Father by his Son in Matthew 14, verse 30. I think I've written that down wrong, where he says the Father knows what we are going to ask before we even ask him. He's ready to come to our aid. Now, what I will say is I'm not sure that the arrow prayer would have the same effect if Nehemiah hadn't previously spent the 4 months weeping and mourning and fasting and praying and confessing and appealing to the promises of God. Not that he earned God's answer, but if we're going to develop a life of prayer like Nehemiah, yes, use those arrow prayers, but yes, let's use the other kinds of prayer as well. God hears all kinds of prayers. God answers all kinds of prayers. As we read in Ephesians 6, pray in the Spirit on all occasions, with all kinds of prayers and requests. With this in mind, be alert and always keep on praying for all the Lord's people. A swift prayer. Let's move on to a sudden promotion. Verses 5 and 6. I answered the king, "If it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favour in his sight, let him send me to the city in Judah where my ancestors are buried, so that I can rebuild it." Then the king, with the queen sitting beside him, asked me, 'How long will your journey take? And when will you get back?' It pleased the king to send me, so I set a time." A sudden promotion. The cupbearer of the Persian court is now the governor of Judah. He's the governor of Judah and of Jerusalem. And what really struck me from these verses is the humility of Nehemiah. Although he's a man of great zeal, and he's got a broken heart for his people and a determination to be used of God for their rebuilding, he is not the kind of zealot that is taking no prisoners and is going to get what he wants by any means necessary. He is humble. What does he say in these verses? He talks about himself as your servant, and favour in his sight, and let him send me. He recognises that it is in the king's power to execute him, to keep him serving the wine, or to send him. So he humbles himself. And he used similar language in the prayer in chapter 1 when he's talking to God. He is a humble man, and that humility pleased the king. It pleased the king to send me. So I set a time. So here is the answer, isn't it, to that great request at the end of chapter 1. Grant me favour, give your servant success today by granting him favour in the presence of this man. It pleased the king to send me. Prayer had moved the mountain. But we don't want to downplay the importance of humility. Listen to what the epistle from James says about humility. Humble yourselves, he says, before the Lord, and he will lift you up. He was not there, was he, like one of the contestants on The Apprentice, trying to extol all his expertise and other references and embellished CV. Choose me, I'm the best guy for the job of governor of Judah. He just simply humbles himself, and he goes away from this conversation promoted to governor. And things continue to unfold. The mountain continues to move in verses 7 to 9. You'll see that Nehemiah is becoming more emboldened here. I also said to him, if it pleases the king, may I have letters to the governors of Trans-Euphrates, so that they will provide me safe conduct until I arrive in Judah. And may I have a letter to Asaph, keeper of the royal park, so he will give me timber to make beams for the gates of the citadel, by the temple, and for the city wall, and for the residence I will occupy. And because of the gracious hand of my God was on me, the king granted my requests. So we have here a safe passage. Also verse 9, I went to the governors of Trans-Euphrates and gave them the king's letters. The king had also sent army officers and cavalry with me. A lot is happening and a lot of travelling in a couple of verses, so bear with me here. So the new governor has been given this role, and he is emboldened, having had his prayers answered and had success for the king, to ask for more. To ask for more. He asks for letters to the governors, so that the other governors, so that they let him travel through their lands and support him on his journey. He then asks for letter to Asaph, who keeps the park, so that there will be timber and all the materials they needed to rebuild the walls and the gates and the new governor's house. And what I love about what happens next is that the king not only grants those requests and writes those letters, he goes even further. He answers the things that Nehemiah should have asked for but didn't, by sending him a small army to go with him, to accompany him on his journey. He even answers the unasked questions. And I think there's a lovely picture here of our prayers to God. Our prayers to God. Sometimes we don't know what to ask, do we? But the Spirit helps us in our weakness. And the Father responds to the message from the Spirit, and He sometimes answers our unasked prayers in ways beyond what we imagined possible. And so the answers keep coming. The power of prayer keeps unfolding, and Nehemiah finds himself with safe passage on the 800 to 900 mile journey to Judah. He spent 4 months praying, 5 minutes talking with the king, and then 3 months on the road. As you said earlier about Nehemiah had been planning, I believe he had been planning what he would say to the king, what he would need when he got to Jerusalem. Through faith, he was preparing. Such was his faith that God would answer his prayers. So fifthly then, and finally verse 10, a steadfast enemy. A steadfast enemy. Whenever in scriptures we see God's people gathering together to do something good, what do we see? The enemies are right there with them, as we were reflecting in home group this week. When I want to do good, evil is right there with me. And the evil here was in the form of the steadfast enemy. Verse 10, when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite official heard about this, they were very much disturbed that someone had come to promote the welfare of the Israelites. We find all the way through this book that Nehemiah's every step is dogged by these three rogues. We have Sanballat the Horonite, we have Tobiah the Ammonite, and later on, chapter 2, verse 19, we meet Geshem the Arab. And they are very much disturbed. Not because Nehemiah has come to attack them, not because the king of Persia is suddenly somehow against them. They were very much disturbed that someone had come to promote the welfare of the Israelites. For these three rogues, what was good for Israel was bad for them. And what was bad for Israel was good for them. They were very much benefiting from a Jerusalem with no walls and gates. And they knew full well when those walls and gates were put in place, they would be persona non grata. So we see there is, although his prayers have been answered, we see the power of prayer, we've seen the mountain, as it were, the heart of the king moving, we've seen a request upon request and even non-requests granted by the king. There is still this steadfast enemy that, as we will see going through the book, will stop at nothing to try and prevent the work being completed. So what has then been accomplished by Nehemiah's prayers? If we think about it, at the point where we pause here, Jerusalem is still in trouble. It's still in disgrace. It's still broken and burned. Its enemies are still prevailing and are implacably opposed to its rebuilding. Nehemiah still has this long, arduous, draining journey to go, and an even more arduous rebuilding project ahead of me. So we could argue that nothing has changed. But Nehemiah's testimony in verse 8 is so important. End of verse 8. The gracious hand of my God was on me. The gracious hand of my God was on me. God had answered these prayers. What would God not do through Nehemiah in the days ahead? And spoiler alert, the wall gets rebuilt in less time than it took for Nehemiah to pray, less time than it took for him to travel. Amazing things happen because of the prayers of Nehemiah and his people, and through the gracious hand of his God. And it something that all the saints of old have understood about the importance of prayer. John Newton said, "Prayer is the great engine to overthrow and rout my spiritual enemies, the great means to procure the graces of which I stand in hourly need." Are we without enemies? Are we here, in an easy life in 2025? Are we here fully self-satisfied with everything we need? We need to pray. Pray like Nehemiah. Pray like John Newton, and understand this is the means that God has appointed to overthrow and rout our spiritual enemies. This is the great means to procure the graces of which we stand, you stand, I stand, in hourly need. So let's just apply this passage to ourselves. If we're going to be God's rebuilders in these days, let's ask ourselves some tricky questions. First question: do you have, like Nehemiah, a broken heart for sin? That's where it all started, wasn't it? It's a broken heart. Do we have a broken heart for sin? Our own sin? The sins of our church? The church more broadly? Our nation? Our world? When we reflect on how holy and perfect God is, we see, like Nehemiah saw, that we too are sinners. Like Isaiah in chapter 6, when he saw the Lord, didn't he? Holy, holy, holy God. Woe is to me, woe unto me, so I am a man of unclean lips, who dwell among a people of unclean lips. If we're going to be useful to God wherever he's placed us, if we're going to be rebuilders, we need to have a broken heart for sin. The sacrifices of God are a broken and a contrite heart, David wrote in Psalm 51. Maybe something we need to pray about. Maybe ask God to give us that broken heart for sin. Secondly, do you have a bold heart for prayer, like Nehemiah? Nehemiah, who brought large petitions to God, who trusted that God could do great things. As Newton again wrote, "Thou art coming to a king, the king of that, the king of the universe, the king of all. Large petitions with thee bring, for his grace and power are such, none can ever ask too much." When we reflect on our prayer lives, are we praying big prayers for the people of Exmouth, of Budley, the people around about us, our family? Are we praying big prayers for what the Lord can do through us and through the churches? Do you have a bold heart for prayer? And finally, and I find this most challenging of all, is do you have a burning heart for God? Do you have a burning heart for God? Do you have that zeal that we reflected on at the beginning? Nehemiah was going to need that zeal to get through and finish the job, and we are going to need that zeal if we're going to accomplish great things under his gracious hand of the power of his name. Do you have that burning heart that is ready for his service wherever you are? Whether you're a cupbearer or a carer or an administrator or somebody who works for the church or a member of a neighbourhood or a family member. We're not all called to be Nehemiahs, but we're all called to be ready for his service wherever you are. Do you have a burning heart for God? Can you pray this prayer of Amy Carmichael, who wrote, "Give me the love that leads the way, the faith that nothing can dismay, the hope no disappointments tire, the passion that will burn like fire. Let me not sink to be a clod. Make me thy fuel, flame of God.